Show me someone who's never failed and I'll show you a failure. The biggest mistakes you can make in business and life are not making any mistakes. Stay tuned. We're going to outline some of the biggest mistakes I've ever made for you. You beat me here again. Alright, so you guys want to know about some of the mistakes I made? I'm going to tell you about a bunch of really stupid ones, and I'm going to tell you the positive spin that I put on all of them. None of this is to glorify my idiotic behavior. I want you to accept now that you're going to be dealing with a lot of people who've made a lot of mistakes, and you're going to have to help them out and put a positive spin on it too, and sales starts right here with yourself. So if you can't convince yourself to turn a situation that you're in into something better, then it ain't gonna work for anybody else, and buying and selling distressed properties is probably not for you. This is actually in chronological order. We can tell a little story for each one of these. These are the 6 best mistakes I've made. The first one is gonna be, I got arrested. I know, it's hard to believe, right? So it was 2001, post 9/11. I had been working in Manhattan for a little while, making a decent salary. I needed some time off, I think the whole world did, and I went back to East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, my college town, where I realized that holy drinks were still the same price. Beers are $1, shots were like $1.50, and I decided to buy the whole bar. Repeated rounds till everybody was absolutely belligerent, and then we decided to go to a frat party. Unfortunately, the frat party really sucked, and I had been lifting weights at this point for a very long time, so I said, you know what, let's take the party somewhere else, and I picked the keg up and put it over my shoulder and proceeded to walk out the front door, where a bunch of fraternity brothers stopped me and said, put that keg down. So I pressed it over my head and slammed it on the porch, and it went through the porch, leaving a giant gaping hole. I might have been trying to get into a fight, but nobody would really do it, so I started to walk away, and then somebody pulled up on a Honda Nighthawk 250, one of these like little kids' motorcycles. He was like, yeah, and don't touch my bike. And there's a reason why I don't drink, so I picked it up like an Olympic hammer thrower, spun around, and threw it through a picture window. Shortly after, the police came and arrested me, where I then spent the next 48 hours in the Monroe County Penitentiary for a disorderly person charge. And yeah, when you're laying there on your back on one of those concrete slabs with a really mattress and a couple cellmates who might have actually kicked the shit out of too, but hey, I heard you have to establish dominance quickly, and it did work. Thinking, wow, where did my life go wrong? And what can I do to better it? I started to realize that, you know, drinking is probably not really for me. And a couple of the officers were like, dude, you threw a motorcycle through a window, like not a moped, an actual motorcycle. And I started thinking, wow, I guess I might actually have some physical power. And I always wanted to pursue bodybuilding. And from that day forth, I actually stopped drinking for the next 5 years and did nothing but continuously seek out mentors and lift weights until I became New Jersey's largest drug-free bodybuilder in 2004. Don't bother Googling it. The only thing you'll find is my Mr. America. So I was able to put a positive spin on it. It's not something I advocate, and I made the best of the situation that I could. The next thing, shortly after I did that bodybuilding contest in 2004, I stand corrected, the week before, I was going to work and I was texting and driving on my Nokia, and the guy ahead of me jammed on his brakes, and I jammed on my brakes, and I came to an immediate stop as well, but I got rear-ended by another guy behind me who was also texting and driving that totaled his car. I got taken away in an ambulance. I had 2 bulging discs in my back. I knew that I was about to win the bodybuilding contest that was exactly like, 5 days from the date of this car accident. And I was in the hospital, I had IVs, and it's a lot of diet, there's a lot of other things, mental preparation, and the doctors are telling me you got a concussion, you got 2 bulging discs, and if you continue doing this and exerting yourself, your brain can hemorrhage and you can die. And as soon as I ran out of food, I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to be in this shape again for a while. At least I'll die happy. I pulled the IV out of my arm, put a cotton ball on it, checked myself out, continued going through the gym, just going through the motions for the next 5 days. And shortly after that, I realized that I wasn't going to really be able to lift weights for a while. I needed a number of epidurals in my back. It was a huge train wreck, and I took that same motivation and dedication that I put towards the sport, if you can call bodybuilding a sport, and I started to attack business, this very business, in the same manner where there was nothing else. I would eat, sleep, and breathe it. Truth be told, I actually saw one of these Robert Kiyosaki commercials during a 90-minute cardio session that was boring as shit, and before you know it, I started making the most of that time digesting audiobooks while I was on the treadmill. And a couple months later, I quit my job and I started my business, and 20 days later, I closed my first deal. I made 20 grand, and the world never looked the same. And I mean, I just stayed dry the entire time till I was actually in business for a couple of years, and I realized everybody else who was making a couple $100,000 plus a year partied like a rock star. So in a moment of weakness, after my second $200,000 plus year, might have even been my third, it was my third, because I actually had a total rock star breakdown my third year. I made $289,000 out of a bedroom in my parents' house by April. And I mean, I partied. I went and I lived in Hawaii with a friend. I actually lost a rental car in the North Shore in the ocean. I came back and I went to actually go pick my future ex-wife up one night at a bar in Hoboken called Scotland Yard. I went in, I had a drink, I picked her up. She came back out with a bottle of Grey Goose in her hand. You can't leave bars with bottles of booze in your hand. I don't know if you knew that. I made her put it down. I was actually driving one of our wrapped cars, the Dealmobile. I got pulled over by the police shortly after. She was in law school and totally liquored up, and they kept referring to her as Johnny Cochran. And the officer told me, step out of the car, and I did. And he told me to recite the alphabet, and I messed it up because I'm dyslexic, and 2 times out of 10, I misspelled my name. Then he told me to walk the line, and I did that as well. And I didn't really do so well with that. Mind you, I had only had 1 drink. He told me, what the fuck's wrong with you, kid? You walk like you have a back injury. And I told him, I do, officer. I just had a couple epidurals. The paperwork is actually under my visor. And he started sticking his finger in my chest, telling me, you got an answer for everything, kid, don't you? So I put my hands at my sides and I told him, just because I look like I can kick your ass doesn't mean I'm going to. And that was it. They threw me over the hood of the car, cuffed me to the bench where I spent the whole night handcuffed to an iron bench in the Hoboken Police Department, where one of my lawyers then bailed me out the following morning. I was charged with DWI. I was breathalyzed. I went. I got a lawyer. I fought it for 10 months. They could never find the results because guess what? I wasn't legally drunk. And 10 months later, when the results finally came through and I got my license, I had prepared for the fact that beating a DWI in the state of New Jersey is actually harder than beating murder. And in the event that I lost, and it didn't really look too good because they convict people for anything, I was going to have to find a way to buy and sell houses without actually being there, and Uber wasn't invented yet. So I had to overcome a tremendous fear of mine, stage fright, and I started speaking at networking events where they had actually seen me get checks for these nothing down deals that I do repeatedly. And before you know it, just in mentorship fees alone, my first month, I collected $140,000. And I gave most of it back because I had no boundaries, and people started calling me all day and all night asking me stupid questions. And then I finally realized why seminars exist, and I booked a date and I invited a bunch of people and I stood up on stage and I gave a presentation, and 90 minutes later we collected 14 grand from our first class, and some of the people that took that class still do deals with us today. If you'd like a copy of that course, by the way, it's linked to the bottom. I hope it helps you out. It's based in reality. This is what forced me to create it. The next biggest mistake I never made is while I started speaking publicly and doing real estate transactions, I had to let go of a few things. And one of the things that I let go of was the checkbook. I had heard Oprah Winfrey say it's a really good idea to sign all of your own checks, but why did I need to do that? I was raking it in hand over fist, and after a while something crazy happened. I probably hadn't signed a check in something like 5 years, and when I finally started looking at the checkbook and going to get money out of the bank, it had become incredibly obvious to me that the $5 million that should have been in the bank wasn't there, and it turned out that a bunch of unscrupulous partners that I had been stealing. I took my eye off the ball to build everything else, and honestly, I just tanked the business. I let it crash and burn, filed bankruptcy, and started over again because I had the one thing that they didn't, the actual knowledge to recreate what I did in less time, just a fraction of it. I know you've probably heard it said over and over again that, if you took all the people with the most money in the world and you made them all broke, they'd all make it back in a year or less. Well, in the next 6 months, I recreated another business, and I had help from a bunch of my investors, and I stayed on as a consultant and literally rebuilt everything better in 6 months or less. And I took off my 30s, which sounds like a really good thing. And don't get me wrong, I am incredibly happy that I did get to experience the world in a younger body. I actually was able to go back to bodybuilding. This is where I wound up actually becoming the first runner-up heavyweight Mr. America, which if you'd like, you can Google. I've seen just about every place I've ever wanted. I was able to take my dad to Brazil a couple times after he retired. Just did a whole bunch of tremendous stuff. I started a family. I climbed my first mountain, and I have nothing left to do on my bucket list. Like, nothing to live for. I even started a family with, I'll be honest with you, the wrong person, but it was a sad situation, and I did love her, but it just didn't work out, and I got incredibly sick after our second child, who had some pretty severe special needs and was severely hypoglycemic, and I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I could stay awake around the clock for 6 months feeding my kid because nobody else could do it, and she didn't need a feeding tube, and in the end we found out that several years earlier, when I climbed that mountain in my 30s, I contracted Lyme disease, which my body had suppressed because I heal really quickly, and it came out, and the doctors thought that I had ringworm, so they gave me corticosteroids to suppress the reaction, which is actually the worst thing you can do if you have Lyme disease. We can attach some pictures to this, and the stuff actually took over my entire body, jumped my blood-brain barrier, and a few days later, 10 to be exact, I woke up one morning and started making breakfast, and I tried to use my left arm, and it was like dead. And then I tried to talk, and I was like, bleh, 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 bleh. And I texted my mom, I sound like a drunken Bob Dylan. My mom's a nurse. She said, you're probably having a stroke, call 911. I did. They came, they picked me up, they found out what was going on, and so my entire life and recovery process continued. I was actually completely neurologically paralyzed in a bed by the time I got to the hospital from all these crazy adventures I went on in my 30s, and they had to put a PICC line in my arm, into my heart, because the antibiotics that they had to give me to save my life would have killed off any vein that they put them in one day, and there wasn't enough days to save me. So my ex made the decision to kill off my heart a little while they had put me on every other opioid and prescription drug known to man. And incredibly humbling experience. Shortly after that, I had to learn how to do things like walk again. And I had a home care nurse, and I would continue to shoot up every morning with antibiotics. We'll link some pictures to this too for the next month. And I couldn't drive for 6 months. And then my ex, the mother of my children, wanted to buy a house, so she brought a tremendous house in a ritzy town. It was Woodcliff Lake on the border of Saddle River on an acre in Bergen County. I mean, it was nice. You'd made it. The place is so big we could have horses if we wanted to. Thought about starting a mini farm, and meanwhile I'm on this mission to just kick all these crazy drugs, and I'm also incredibly depressed. And part of the reason why I'm incredibly depressed is not just because of all the prescription drugs that I had kicked, but for the fact that having kids wasn't really something that was in the cards for me. I'd rather live and go on adventures and do all this other stuff, and she wanted to have kids, and I told her, hey, that's great, you want to have kids, I want to sleep with other women. Certainly we can work this out. And it wasn't a quick conversation. This was negotiated out over the period of several years, and it was pretty sad because she went through fertility treatment and it failed, and finally I read a few books and we actually cracked the code and it worked, and that's actually how I became a sperm donor too. And then she changed her mind after the first kid and said, I don't like you sleeping with anybody anymore. I was like, you don't get to take that back now that we've made a decision we can't change. And I did stick around help her take care of the kids for several years, and it was incredibly heartbreaking, and my joints hurt like hell, and she was a big advocate of taking me to my neurologist and every other doctor, and she kept telling them, you got to put him on Cymbalta, you got to put him on Cymbalta, you got to put him on Cymbalta, you got to put him on Cymbalta. And one of the reasons why there's no commercials for this on TV anymore, which is one of these prescription antidepressants for people who have fibromyalgia-like symptoms and depression. Well, maybe I was a little depressed, but guess what? I didn't have fibromyalgia. And if you don't have what they're prescribing this drug to you for, there's another magical effect. Even though you sleep, you don't get any REM sleep. So 12 months later, I hadn't actually gotten any real rest. I noticed I looked like shit, my body was falling apart, and I'd actually crossed the line to clinical insanity, where I was starting to have these massive suicidal thoughts to the point of where it was like I was just unhappy with everything. And it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life, where I had to literally tell my ex, like, I need help. And then I told my parents because she told me to go get it. And it sounds easy until you actually need to say it. I called the doctor and I told him, and he goes, oh yeah, this could happen if you aren't actually depressed or don't have fibromyalgia. I was like, well, I'm going to stop taking this stuff. And he told me, yeah, but you can't. Like, what do you mean I can't? I don't want to. It doesn't make me feel anything except I'm not really sleeping when I sleep, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. And I've been telling people that for a while, and it was total insanity, and they had to come up with, I guess, a tapering or a detox schedule. Because I was like, Doc, did he turn me into a junkie? Like, what is this? He's like, no, it's a chemical dependency. There's no fun from taking this, but we can't take you off of it. And they started tapering me down, and I think I was on something like 90 milligrams, and they cut it by 20. And in the course of the next 24 hours, I think I completely lost my through a 5-year-old temper tantrum, probably got in a fight with myself, which was pretty terrifying because for a while I was winning, but in the end I ultimately triumphed over myself because I am a formidable adversary to me. And I remember at one point in time I was actually laying on the floor in my mom's house making rug angels, just crying and like washing my hands and feeling things like water and cold, because what it had actually also done is managed to kill off a lot of my smaller neural pathways, so I don't feel pain like a normal person does anymore. It sounds really cool until you get a chunk knocked out of your leg and you can see the bone and you don't really feel it or know that you're hurt. And obviously I had to sell off a few properties and make a couple things happen so I can keep going, which brings us to today, where I'm rebuilding yet again, and I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm having a lot of fun doing it, and honestly, it's a blessing because without going through all this, I never would have met you. I hope you really enjoyed this. I'm not trying to glorify any of this stuff that I've been through. What I'm trying to teach you is how to put a positive spin on everything, because that's what you're going to have to do with your distressed sellers. I really hope you've enjoyed these stories because they are actually true and a piece of me, and I know a lot of it's nothing to be proud of. My name's Chuck Kohout. Don't forget to smash the subscribe button. Like this video if you'd like it. Always be closing. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.